All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors of today's daf. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, Yoel Sara Kelman, for dedicating the Shurim and Drashos in this month in honor of the birth of their daughter, Oriya Tahel, and in the hope that all those davening for the Brocha of children will have their tefilos answered b'karov. To thank Teri Czinn for dedicating all the Shurim and Drashos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Adin, Tzvi, and Naftali, Moshe. Shirley Elbaum Family in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kopel ben R Avraham Menachem. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Boruch and Brocha Rivkin, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Rabbi Reuven, Rivkin, Harav, Reuven ben Tzvi. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. And Menachem and Susie Schoenfeld for dedicating the daf today in the zechus of a continued refuah shalima for Michael Goldsmith, who Baruch Hashem, many of the Chevra just met. I don't know if we'll see if he's here this morning. It was quite a party last night, Baruch Hashem. So, many of the Chevra were introduced to last night at the Siyum, who really delivered a beautiful and overwhelming Devar Torah last night during our Siyum. Kodesh Baruch Hu should just grant him a continued refuah and continued hatzlacha mea be'esim shanim tovos. Amen. And I will say yeshikach to everyone who was part of last night's simcha. So special, so beautiful, so wonderful. Thank you again to all of our sponsors, to our caterer, to a special thank you also not only to John Kaplan who was kidding, but also to Saeed for Mamish helping with all of the choreography behind the scenes as well. Mamish, a beautiful, beautiful Simchas HaTorah. We should be zocheh to celebrate many beautiful milestones together in the years to come. Amen. So we'll say today's beautiful, magnificent, and overwhelming daf is Yud Aleph. We are picking up in Yahrzeit Hashem on Yud Base 10b, and we are picking up about 22 lines up from the bottom. Yeah, I know. Rabbi Levi says as follows: Davar zeh masores b'yadinu me'avosin. We have a Masorah. We have a tradition from our ancestors, which is Makom Aron Eina Min Amida. Fascinating idea that the Aron, the ark itself, did not occupy physical space within the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, Eina Min Amida literally means is not part of the measurements, which means that we're going to see in just a moment, the Aron itself did not actually occupy physical space in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Taina Me'acha Brisa that supports this. Here we go. Aron Sha'asa Moshe Yesh Lo Eser Amos L'chol Ruach. So interestingly enough, we know that it said that there were 10 amos of space between the Aron and the walls of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So 10 amos of space in the Aron and the walls. Uksiv V'lifnei Advir Esrim Amo Orech. So Rabbi say, furthermore, we know that ultimately, again, the Kodesh HaKadoshim itself was 20 amos in length. So we've got 10 amos in space between the Aron and each wall, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim itself being 20 amos long. Furthermore, it says, Uksiv, Knaf HaKarova Echad Eser Amos, Uknaf HaKarova Echad Eser Amos. Furthermore, it says that the wing of each of Kruv, the Kruvim, remember again, were like the angelic type figures perched on the lid of the Aron. So the span of each wing was 10 amos. Which I will say means what? Which means that the span of the Aron itself was 20 amos. The length of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 20 amos. And yet, again, we're being told that there's 10 amos in between the side of the Aron and each wall of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which doesn't make any sense. Because it sounds like the Aron itself would have filled every single inch of space, or amma of space, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim itself. Yet we're being told that's not the case. To which the Gemara says, Aron gufa hecha, with those measurements, where was the Aron itself situated? Elulav shmamina b'neis haya omeid. Rather, Rabbi say again, you see from here that the Aron itself was miraculously housed in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That the Aron, remember also what the Gemara is pointing out over here is the dimensions of the Aron and the dimensions of the Kodesh HaKadoshim do not reconcile with each other. Rather, it must be Aron Eino Min Hamida. the Aron did not take up physical space in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which Rabbi say is a dramatic and overwhelming idea, but leads one to a very simple question: why? Rabbi say, in the world of miracles, there are two different types of miracles. There are utilitarian miracles and message miracles. Utilitarian miracles are miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to perform in order to accomplish some type, or in order to address some type of need. Right? The paradigmatic example of that would be the splitting of the Yam Suf, splitting of the Red Sea. The Egyptians are in hot pursuit. There's a body of water in front of us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to split the water in order to get us across. That's a utilitarian miracle. But then there's something else that's called a message miracle. And a message miracle means something that is not necessary, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us a lesson. He's trying to convey to us some. So as you look at a miracle like this, that the Aron doesn't occupy any physical space, and you wonder to yourself, why? So, why not just build a bigger Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? In other words, this is not like a building fund issue, Baruch right? So just build a bigger Kodesh HaKadoshim. Elamai, perhaps the message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was trying to teach us was an incredible yesod, that Torah can exist even under physically impossible circumstances. You see, there are some things that you could only do when physicality allows for it. And then there are other things that can be accomplished even if there is no physical way to make it happen. I was just learning with a bar mitzvah boy yesterday, helping him prepare his Dvar Torah, and we were learning a piece from the Piazetzna, and he had never heard of the Piazetzna before. And I said to him, tell me where you go to school right now. I'm calling your principal. How can you never heard of the Piazetzna? What kind of chinuch is that? A kid never hears about the Eish Kodesh. Less than 100 years ago, one of the most important figures, right? The Eish Kodesh, the Piazetzna. So I explained about the Piazetzna, and he was wound by the story. I said, that's Aron Eino Min Amida. The fact that Torah can be taught in the Warsaw Ghetto under the most horrific of circumstances, in the midst of the most profound brutality that mankind has ever seen, and that we're able to learn Torah, and that Torah was still able to learn today, that's what it means. Aron Eino Min Hamida. Torah is Lemala Min Hateva. It is beyond the realms of the natural order of the world. We're able to learn Torah in the most ridiculous of circumstances. Torah is able to survive in the most overwhelming of circumstances. And Torah is able to anchor us even when physically there should be no reason that we should be able to survive and persevere. That's the message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was trying to teach us. The Aron itself did not fit into the physical dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash, but yet somehow it was there. Sometimes our physical circumstances do not allow for certain things, but even when physically things become impossible, Torah is always able to endure. An incredible yesod. The Gemara goes right. Rabbi Yochanan pasach lepischa lahai parshas me'achas. So we'll say we're going to spend the bulk of today's daf on is Mirza Hashem, being able to see something very interesting, which is the way that different Tanoim and Amoraim introduced their shiurim on Megillas Esther. So that's what it means when it says Rabbi Yonasan pasach lepischa. Rabbi Yonasan gave the following introduction. This was his introduction to Megillah. He gave his introduction to Megillah. Mehai parshas mehacha. V'kamti alehem. V'ichrasi lebavel shem ushar v'nin v'nechad nu'um Hashem. So the pasuk is referring to the destruction of Bavel. So both say, so what does it mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will go ahead and rise up against Bavel, and again I will go ahead and cut off from Bavel. V'ichrasi lebavel shem she'er nin v'nechad nu'um Hashem. What does this mean? Shem zaksav. I will eradicate the writing of Babel, right? Babylonian alphabet writing of Babel. She'er ze lashon, Babylonian language. Nin ze malchus. I will cut off Babylonian monarchy. V'nechad zu Vashti. I'll cut off Vashti. Remember again, Vashti was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Rabbi Shlomo bar Nachmani pasach lepischa lahai parshas mehacha. Rabbi Shlomo bar Nachmani would open up his discussion on Megillah from here. Tachas hana'atzutz ya'aleh berosh. The tachas hasir pad ya'aleh hadas. We'll say the pasuk says, we read this again on the Haftorah on fast days. Literally, underneath the natzutz. Natzutz are thorns. Instead of thorns, the cypress will grow. Tachas hasirpad. Sirpad is also a type of thorns. Ya'aleh hadas. The myrtle will grow. Well, listen to how beautiful this is. Tachas hana'atzutz. Who is this thorn? Tachas Haman Rasha. Sha'asa atzma avodah zara. We also will get into this in the Agarata and the Megillah. Haman made himself into a deity. So he was the thorn. Tichsiv. Obechol hanatzutzim obechol hanahalulim ya'ale barosh. Who's the cypress that will rise up instead of the thorns? Zem Mordechai. Mordechai is the cypress who will rise up instead of the thorns of Haman. Shenikra Rosh L'Chala B'Samim. But say, listen to this. Mordechai is called the Rosh L'Chala B'Samim. See, it's a little bit of a play on words. It's Tachas Hanatzut instead of the thorns. The thorns are Haman. Ya'ale B'Rosh. The cypress. Now we translate B'Rosh as the cypress. That's Mordechai. But I will say it's a little bit of a play on words. Mordechai is called Rosh. Why is Mordechai called Rosh? So I will say, those of us who say Ketoras every morning will recognize this drasha. Shene'emar, the ata kach lecha b'samim rosh mar diror. You shall go ahead and take for yourself b'samim rosh, right? B'samim rosh. The first of the b'samim, mar diror. That's the name of the herb. But the Targum says in the Targaminon, mari dachi. Now we'll say, what's the Aramaic for mar diror? Mari dachi. And when you put mari dachi together, what do you get? Mordechai. How beautiful is that, right? How beautiful is that? Oh, that's the play on words over here. So, Berosh means cypress, but ultimately, again, it's referring to Mordechai, who is the Rosh of the Besamim. He was the most fragrant. Michael, Shalom Aleichem. Baruch haba, welcome. He was right. He was the Rosh. He was the best of the Besamim, the most fragrant of all the Besamim. Tachas has sirpad, underneath again the thorns. Tachas Vashti harasha bas benosha Nebuchadnezzar shesaraf refidas beis Hashem dichsev refidas ozav. So we'll say, so underneath Vashti, right? Vashti is also considered to be the thorns. The granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, Ya'ala Hadas. The Hadas will sprout up, and who is the Hadas? Esther Hatzadekes Shenikres Hadassah. We'll say this refers to Esther Amalka, who is called Hadassah. Now, when we get into the Megillah, because we're going to go through the Megillah, when we get through the Megillah, we'll see beautiful interpretations as to why she was called Hadassah. Shene'emar Vahi Omin Es Hadassah V'Haya Hashem L'Shem. And by what does it mean by Hashem L'Shem? Zeh Mikra Megillah. This refers ultimately again to the reading of the Megillah. Li'os Olam Lo Yikares, for all eternity it shall not be cut off. Eila Yimei Purim. These are the days of Purim. So therefore, Rabbi understood that this entire pasuk, was a metaphor to the replacement of Haman with Mordechai, to the replacement of Vashti with Esther, and to the an ode to the, or I should say, an eternal ode to the salvation of the Jewish people, Purim and Megillah. Rabbi Shimon Levi pasuk like Piskal Hai Parshas Mihacha. Rabbi Shimon Levi, he introduced Megillah with the following drasha. V'haya kasher sas Hashem aleichem lehitiv eschem kein yasis la'araschem. So we'll say here, the Gemara quoting the pasuk from Dvarim. So the pasuk literally says, and it will be, as Hashem rejoiced on you to do good, so He shall rejoice to visit Ra upon you. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Does Yivashlam rejoice over the downfall of the wicked? Ba'aksiv, b'tseis lifnei hachalutz, va'omrim hodu la'Hashem, kili olam chasdo. Yet the pasuk says, when you shall go out before the chalutz. Shabbos say this pasuk over here is in Divrei Hayomim, and Rashi explains that this is talking about when Yehoshaphat went out to battle against the Ammonim and the Givonim. So the pasuk says, ultimately when you go out, you will say, Hodu la'Hashem kili olam chasdo. Give praise to Hashem for His salvation, right? Because His chesed is forever. But if you notice, it doesn't say what? It doesn't say Hodu la'Hashem kitov. Right? Kitov is missing. Because the Rebbe Shalom does not rejoice over the downfall of the wicked. Rebbe is an incredible idea. So Rebbe said, listen to this. This is by Kriyas Yamsuf. Bikshu malachi asharis lomar shira. The Malachim wanted to sing Shira when HaKadosh Baruch Hu drowned the Egyptians in the Yamsuf. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe said, Ma'aseh yadai tovin bayam. The Ata Omrim Shira. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, my creations are drowning in the sea, and you want to sing Shira. But say, an incredible yesod. It's very important to understand. We, the Jewish people, have not cornered the market on God, right? God does not belong to us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the God of all humanity. We are privileged to enjoy a unique relationship with Him, but the Rebbe Shalom's love extends upon every single human being. There is a beautiful and unique relationship that Am Yisrael enjoys with the Ribono Shel Olam, but it is so incredibly important to understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the God of humanity. In fact, the hallmark of the Messianic era is the fact that humanity will recognize the Ribono Shel Olam as their God. That's what Mashiach is all about. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Malachim, you want to sing Shira, you want to sing a song that the Egyptians are drowning in the sea. They're not my children? They're not my children. I can't sing Shira when my children are suffering, when my children are drowning. So ultimately, again, so the Gemara says, you're right. Amar Abelazar, hu enosas. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not rejoice upon the downfall of the wicked. Avalachira mesis, but He allows others to rejoice. He allows others to rejoice. The pasuk says, Ken yosis, v'lo ksiv yosus. The pasuk says, they shall rejoice. It doesn't say, he shall rejoice. Shma mina. Rabbi Abba Bar Kana, pasuk le'piskal hai parshas me'acha. So Rabbi said, Rabbi Abba Bar Kana, he opened his drasha on Megillah from the following psukim. The Adam, quoting over here from Koheles. The Adam shetov lefanav nasan chachma v'das v'simcha. So we'll say, let's listen to this. So quoting over here, Kila Adam shetov lefanav nasan chachma v'das v'simcha. So for the person who is good in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Rebbe Shalom is given chachma, das, and simcha. Who does that refer to? Zeh Mordechai HaTzadik. This refers to Mordechai. Ulachote nasan inyan lesof lichnos. And ultimately, again, for the sinner, He has given, literally again, the inyan la'asov v'lichnos will be collected and drawn to Himself. Zeh Haman. This refers to Haman. Lo seis tov lifnei Elokim zeh Mordechai ve'Esther. D'chsiv v'tasem Estres Mordechai al beis Haman. Pasuk says that Esther placed Mordechai. This is the end of the Megillah. She essentially gave Mordechai the house of Haman. Rabbi Bar Ofra, he opened his discussion of Megillah from the following: V'samti kisi be'ilam, v'avarati misham melech v'sarim. Melech zuvashti. King in this context refers to Vashti. Sarim Zehaman V'aseres Banav and his 10 sons. Rav Dimi Bar Yitzchak Pasach LePischal Hai Parshas Mehacha. Rav Dimi Bar Yitzchak, he opened his discussion on Megillah from the following. Both say top line of Yud Aleph from Aleph. Good. Today's daf. We made it. Ki avodim anachnu u'ba'avodoseinu lo azavnu Elokim. Vayet aleinu chesed lifnei malchei paras. So both say, listen to this. So the Gemara is quoting the pasuk from Tehillim, right? Literally, again, for we are servants. Ki avadim anachnu, we are servants. Uba'avodoseinu lo azavnu Elokim. But in our servitude, we never left you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Ribbon Shalom put chesed in front of us by malchei paras. When is this? Be'emasai bizman Haman. This Rabbi is referring ultimately again to the days of Haman. Even though we were in servitude, and even though there was the threat of annihilation, we never left you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa pasach le'pischal hai parshas mehacha. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. Let's say the point, by the way, just to understand like what the point of all of this is. If you notice, what's happening is all of these different rabbanim are trying to show the story of Esther, just alluded to and hinted to in other texts. That's what's happening over here. And again, we'll see what they really do is they developed drushas on this as Rabbi Chanina bar Papa pasach le'pischal hai parshas mehacha. Here kafta enosh l'rashenu banu ba'ish u'bamayim. Literally, again, you have placed man on top of us. We have gone through the fire and the water. David HaMelech and tell him, what does this mean? Ba'ish b'mei Nebuchadnezzar. We have gone through the fire. This is in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, b'mei Nebuchadnezzar Harasha, u'bamayim in water, b'mei Paro. In the days of Paro. Both say, what does it mean, water in the days of Paro? So remember, again, a reference to two things. Number one, Kriyas Yamsuf. Rabbi say also this week's parasha, Kalabein Hayilod Hayaora Tashlichuhu, Paro's original decree. Rabbi say sometimes, right, you take a step back for a moment. Like I just tell you, I had this like moment last night when we're celebrating together a beautiful suuda, such a sense of chevrashat camaraderie, and you think for a moment, like in the midst of that, what we've been through as a people. right? You think about these things. What we've been, literally, it's this week's parasha. It's this week's parasha when Paro says, right, to his nation, Kol habein hayilod hayorah tashlichu. Throw the Jewish babies into the Nile. We read it as a pasuk in Chumash, but close your eyes and just imagine that moment when mothers, when fathers hear that their babies are going to be thrown into the Nile. And it's overwhelming. And think about this. Think that's one episode. That's one episode in thousands of years of heartbreak. Right? Ubechol zos shimcha lo shachachnu. And yet, we're learning the Daf. We're learning Torah. Am Yisrael is strong. Am Yisrael is vibrant. Am Yisrael is overwhelmingly amazing. It's incredible, right? It's absolutely. Sometimes we don't think about it, but to think of everything we've gone through and now where we are in this world and who we are, it's a nes nigla. Each of us is mamish a nes nigla. Each of us is a walking, talking, living, breathing miracle. And we should never lose sight of that. So the Gemara goes back there. So the Gemara says, but we went through fire and water. When did we go through fire and water? In the days of Paro and Nebuchadnezzar. Vatosi'enu l'Revia b'mei Haman. So the Gemara says, that refers to the days of Haman. Rabbi Yochanan Pasach le'Pischal Hay Parshas Amihacha Zecher Chasdo. Zochar Chasdo v'Emunaso Leveis Yisrael Ra'u Kol Afsei Aretz Eis Yeshuas Elokeinu. So we'll say again another pasuk from Tehillim. Zochar Chasdo v'Emunaso Leveis Yisrael. He remembered his chesed and his faith in Klal Yisrael. Ra'u Kol Afsei Aretz Yeshuas Elokeinu. Right, all the corners of the world, all those leaders in the world saw the salvation of our God. When was this? First of the widest lines on the daf. Ultimately, again, when did all the nations of the world see our salvation? Bimei Mordechai ve'Esther. In the days of Mordechai and Esther. Beautiful. Reish Lakish will say first of the widest lines on Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, 3, 6, about 9 lines down from the top. Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish opened his discussion of the Megillah from the following pasuk. Ari Nohem Vidov Shokek Moshe Rasha Al Amdal. The pasuk says literally the lion roars and the bear growls. Moshe Rasha Al Amdal. The Rasha, the wicked, rule over the impoverished nation. Who does this refer to? Ari Nohem Nebuchadnezzar. The roaring lion, that's the Nebuchadnezzar Harasha. The Chsiv Bey. Allah Aryeh Misovcho. Dov Shokek, who's the growling bear? Za'achashverosh. This refers to Achashverosh. T'chsiv va'aroch yivei achar t'niya dam yeledov. V'tei Rabbi Yosef, ilu parsim. In general, the bear refers to the Persians. Sha'ochlin v'shosim kedov. This is interesting. Apparently Persians eat and drink like bears, which is a lot. U'misrubalin basar kedov. They're obese like bears, umigudalin seyar kidov, and they're hairy like bears. Okay, so this was Chazal's description of the ancient Persians. Okay, ve'ein lahem menucha kidov, and interestingly enough, they find no rest like bears. I guess I always thought bears sleep for a long time, but apparently bears are restless animals. So the Persians too, they find no rest like Dov, right? So the Gemara, Moshe Rasha, who is the ruler who is wicked? Zeh Haman. This refers to Haman. Al Amdal, who ruled over an impoverished nation. Who is that? Elu Yisrael Shem Dalin Min HaMitzvos. This refers to Klal Yisrael, ultimately, who are impoverished from mitzvos. So we'll say, remember again, we'll get into this more, but the state of Ruchnius, of Klal Yisrael, in the beginning of the Megillah, was very low, was very compromised, right? Our spiritual state was compromised in the beginning of the Megillah. And I will say, the way it works is very simple. Amalek always gets the upper hand when we are spiritually compromised. That's the way it works. This is the constant struggle between Yaakov and Esav. Remember again, Amalek is a grandson of Esav. This was the struggle that began in the womb of Rivka Imenu. Vaisrotetsu habanim Bekirba. This is Yaakov holding on to the heel of Esav. This is the Brocha of Esav, right? Rav Ya'avod Sa'ir Ulom Ya'amas. This constant struggle. So when does the Rasha have the upper hand? When it's an Amdal, when Klal Yisrael is spiritually compromised. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, You saw that Rabbi Yitzchak, he opened his conversation from here. So, ba'atzaltayim yima hamekare, ubeshiflus yadayim yidlov habayis. Literally again, uba'atzaltayim, with laziness, the ceiling will collapse. Ubeshiflus yadayim yidlov habayis. And with weakness of hands, the home will leak. What does this refer to? Because of the laziness of Klal Yisrael that we did not engage in Torah. Literally again, the enemies of God. We've seen this enough. The enemies of God is a metaphor for who? Klal Yisrael, when we don't do the mitzvah, so we become the enemies of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we become weakened. Ve'ein mach ela ani. Mach ultimately again means impoverished. Shneimar ve'mach u'me'erkecha. Ve'ein mikara, who is the ceiling, so to speak, ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shneimar ha'mikara b'mayim al yosav. So we'll say, isn't that beautiful, by the way? The Ribbon Shalom referred to as the ceiling of Klal Yisrael. Where there is laziness, we'll say, what a profound idea. Where there is laziness from Klal Yisrael, yimach ha'mikara. Ultimately, the ceiling collapses. The ceiling is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When I'm strong and doing what I'm supposed to be doing, the ceiling is strong. But the moment I become lazy is chas v'shalom, when the ceiling collapses. What a profound metaphor. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he opened his drasha from the following. Shira Malos, Lule Hashem, Shailanu Yomer, Lomer na Yisrael. So we'll say, what does this mean? Shira Malos, song of ascents. Lule Hashem Shahayalanu, were it not for Hashem by our side, or was with us, Yomer na Yisrael. Lule Hashem Shahaya Lanu Bekum Aleinu Adam. It was, right, if it were not for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who was with us, when a man rose up against us. Adam velo Melech. Interestingly enough, I will say, who rose up against us? A man and not a king. Who is that a reference to? Haman. Haman, who rose up against us, who was not a king. He was just an Adam. He ultimately rallied a king, but he was not a... Rava opened this discussion from the following. So he quotes over here, Birabos tzadikim yismach ha'am, ubimshol rasha ye'anach am. Literally again, Birabos tzadikim. Birabos was like, could either mean amplification, exalted, growth of the tzaddik. Ultimately, the nation will rejoice. With the rulership of the Rasha, the nation will groan. Biravos tzadikim yismach ha'am ze Mordechai ve'Esther. So ultimately, this refers to Mordechai and Esther. D'chsiv va'yir Shushan tzahalav v'samecha. I will say, isn't this beautiful? When the nation sees tzaddikim, I will say, sometimes one of the greatest challenges we have is sometimes like, it's hard for Klal Yisrael to rally around tzaddikim. Right? Even if you ask people, like, who's the Gadol Hadar? Well, it depends who you ask, right? It depends who you ask. Is this, right, Reb Chaim, this, that. Right? So, there's a certain sadness to that. So, part of the beauty of the Purim story is that if you ask people in the aftermath of the Purim story, who are the tzaddikim in the generation, what would they answer? Mordechai and Esther. Now, in all fairness, how long did that last for? About 7.5 minutes, right? Because even by the end of the Megillah, what does it say? Mordechai ratzui l'rov echad. The majority of people, right? He had 51%. Which, by the way, for leadership in general, 51% is incredible, right? Any leader could give. Moshe Rabbeinu at times did not have 51%. So that is great, but that's so incredible, right? That by the time we get to the end of the Megillah, right? He's at 51. So, there's, unfortunately, it's hard for Klal Yisrael to rally around any one leader or any one person. So the pasuk says at least part of the beauty of the Megillah was for a particular period of time, albeit a short one, we recognize the tzidkus of Mordechai and Esther. This is the first time. This was in the beginning of the Megillah, right? When Haman first hatched his plan with Achashverosh, the city of Shushan was Tzibrachin, was Nevucha, was downtrodden. So Ramasta Mehacha, Kimi Goy Godol Asher Lo Elokim Krovim Elov. Ravashar Mehacha, O Anis Elokim. So both say, here we go. So now we're going to get into the drashas of the Megillah. Very, very, very exciting Gemara. It was in the days of Achashverosh. Amarav Vai Hai. Now, say this goes back to yesterday's daf. You remember again in yesterday's daf we learned. So there was a hamachlokes. Vayihi bimei. Right. So we saw that Vayihi sometimes means foreshadowing something good, sometimes something bad. Vayhi bimei, always something bad. Now it's interesting because the Gemara didn't explain why. In other words, okay, we gave our drasha, but why? Like, what is it in the word Vayehi that's so bad? So I resisted the temptation to tell you a marsha because it was going to be in today's daf. So I figured save it to today's daf. Also, I ran out of time. So the Gemara said, listen to this. What's so bad about the word Vayehi? We'll say, listen to this. Rav says Vayehi is a contraction for Vayhai. Vayhai is translated as Oi, right? Oi. Vayhai, right? Whoa, what happens? Isn't that incredible? Now I understand why Vayehi, and ours, poor Vayehi, it looks like we're picking on Vayehi, which is such an innocuous word, to which the Gemara says it's not an innocuous word at all. Vayehi, Vayhai. There was something overwhelming, which Vay literally means I, like whoa, hi, this. This was an overwhelming episode. Now, by the way, sometimes things can be overwhelmingly good, and sometimes things can be overwhelmingly bad. That's why Vayehi sometimes can be, this was so good, or this was so overwhelmingly bad. So how did the chsiv? Vismakartem sham la'ayvecha. The pasuk says, again, by exile you shall be sold there to your enemies as servants. Ushmol lamar lo ma'astem v'lo ga'altem l'cholosam lo ma'astem b'imei yivanim. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells us, I will not literally again become disgusted by you in the days of the Greeks. V'lo ga'altem b'imei Nebuchadnezzar l'chalosam, and I will not allow you to be destroyed b'imei Haman. L'hafer brisi itam b'imei Parsim, in the days of the Persians. Ki ani Hashem Elokeichem b'imei Gog u'Magog. So we'll say Kadosh Baruch Hu promises us that during every stage of difficulty and persecution, be it the Greeks, the Persians, Nebuchadnezzar, Gog u'Magog, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will never sever my relationship with you. Masli satana lo ma'astem b'mei Kastiyim. I did not become revolted by you in the days of the Kastiyim. Shemarati lahem Daniel, Hananya, Mishal, Azariah. I gave you prophets. V'lo ga'altim, and I was not repulsed by you. B'mei Yevanim. Shemarati lahem Shimon HaTzadik, v'chashmonoi banov, u'matisyo u'koin gadol. At every stage of the journey, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us tzaddikim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us leaders who are able to anchor us, able to help us, and able to be the architects of salvation. So the Gemara says, "L'chalosam b'mei Haman, shemarati lahem Mordechai ve'Esther." I gave you Mordechai and Esther in the days of Haman. Lahafer brisi itam b'mei Parsim, shemarati lahem Beis Rebbe v'chachmei Dora. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, isn't this a beautiful Gemara? The Yoel Shalom says, even in times when you are cut off, and even in times when you are exiled and dispersed, I will always give you the proper leaders to be able to anchor you and to be able to maintain your relationship with me. So beautiful. For I am Hashem, your God. Li asid lavo. In the future, she'ein kol uma v'lashon yechola lishlot bahem. Ultimately, again, no nation will ever be able to truly rule over us. And I will say, even those who rule over us will be able to rule over our body, but are never able to rule over the spirit of the Jew. Rabbi Levi Amar Rahacha, Rabbi Levi, again, another introduction to Megillah. So also the Gemara teased us a little bit with Achashverosh, right? But again, we'll come back to it in just a bit. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Levi Amar Rahacha, Vim lo sorishu es yoshvei aretz. The pasuk here says, the Gemara recording here the pasuk from Bamidbar. V'im sorishu es yoshvei aretz v'mneichem v'haya asher tosiru mehem. Let's see. So also here the Gemara is actually talking about when you come into Eretz Yisrael, conquer and drive out all of the nations. Because if you don't, whoever you leave behind will be a thorn in your side. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Chia Ar Mehacha Vayak Kasher Dimisi Lasos Lahem Eselochem. Good. Achashverosh Amarav. So we'll say, what does Achashverosh mean? Amarav Achiv Shel Rosh. He was a brother of the Rosh. Uben Gilo Shel Rosh, and he was very similar in character to the Rosh. We'll say, who's the Rosh? Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to see, by the way, we'll say, not for today. It is fascinating to study Achashverosh from a psychological perspective. Right? We're going to see this machlokes in the Gemara. Was Achashverosh very wise? Was he very foolish? But one thing is clear, which is Achashverosh always lives in the shadow of Nebuchadnezzar. In his mind, he always compared himself to Nebuchadnezzar. So the Gemara says he was the brother of the Rosh, the comparator to the Rosh. Achiv shel Nebuchadnezzar harasha shenikra Rosh shenemar antu reisha didava ben gilo shel Rosh. How is he of the same type of quality of Nebuchadnezzar? Hu harag, Nebuchadnezzar killed Jews. Nebuchadnezzar killed Jews. Hu bikesh larog, Achashverosh also tried to kill Jews. Hu hachriv, ultimately Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. Hu bikesh lachariv, Achashverosh wanted to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Shneimar u'b'malchus Achashverosh betchilas malcho kasvu sitna al yoshvei Yud Yerushalayim. We're going to see something fascinating. Remember, it was the son of Achashverosh, Daryavesh, who is the son of Achashverosh and Esther, who allowed for the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash. Interesting historical fact. The construction of the second Beis Hamikdash began before Achashverosh. It began before Achashverosh. Achashverosh was the one who halted construction. He stopped it. Why did he stop it? Because he didn't like Jews. Just to be very clear, Achashverosh didn't like Jews even before Haman. He wasn't going to annihilate them, but he certainly was not going to allow to facilitate and certainly pay for the construction of our Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. So construction was already underway from the previous Darius and the previous Daryavesh to reconstruct the temple. Right? Achashverosh comes to power, he stops it. He doesn't like Jews already. Again, ironically, Achashverosh's son, also Daryavesh, who happened to be Jewish, right, the son of Esther, he was the one ultimately with Ezra who allows for the total construction of the Beis Hamikdash. In any event, ultimately, again, the faces of Klal Yisrael became blackened during the days of Achashverosh, kishulei kedera, like the bottom of a pot. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kol shezochro Amar Ach l'Rosh. Why is he called Achashverosh? We'll say this is great because whoever says his name gets a headache. Right? Just remembering Achashverosh gives you a headache. Right? That's how bad he was. Ach l'Rosh. As we'll say, whoever says him says Ach l'Rosh. Doesn't he say Ach l'Rosh? Oh yeah, ach for my head. Ach for my head. I will say, that's his name. Achashverosh, ach for my head. I get a headache just talking about him. Rabbi Chanina Amar, Shakol Na'asin Rashin B'Yamav. Ultimately, again, I will say, why is he called Achashverosh? Because everyone became impoverished in his days. Why did everyone become impoverished in his days? Why? Shneimar, Vayasmel Achashverosh Mas. I will say, if you notice, by the way, there are 3 times in the Megillah, that the Megillah talks about raising taxes. Achashverosh was all about raising taxes. Right? Ultimately, again, therefore, Achashverosh, everyone became rush, everyone became impoverished during his days. Who Achashverosh? So I will say, remember again, it says, Vaymi Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? He was Achashverosh. What does that mean? Listen to this. Who Achashverosh? Who Berisho mitchilasa va'ad sofo. He was wicked from beginning to end, right? I will say again, who Achashverosh? Achashverosh didn't change. I will say, just to be very clear, Achashverosh was opportunistic, right? He wasn't the Chozer B'tshuva. It's not the Pshat that at the end of the Megillah, when he cancels the decree, he sees the light, becomes a lover of Jews, and therefore, I will say, Achashverosh was a Rasha from beginning to end. He was an opportunistic with low self-esteem. And therefore, again, whoever built him up is the side that he went to. Haman built him up, he went to Haman. Esther builds him up, he goes to Esther. So we'll say, this is very important because this is the reason why on Purim, we do not have Hallel, right? We're going to see this in the Gemara. The Gemara says, why don't we say Hallel on Purim? Because the Gemara says, Akate avde Achashverosh hanan. Because at the end of the Purim story, we are still servants to a despotic, unpredictable, opportunistic king. And therefore, we never know what tomorrow is going to bring. Therefore, it's an incomplete salvation. It's a Yom Tiv, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but it is an incomplete salvation. So the Gemara says, similarly again, Hu Esav, the same idea. Torah says, Hu Esav, Hu Berisho, mitchilasa v'ad sofo. Hu dasan v'aviram, heim berisha mitchilasan v'ad sofon. Hu amelech achaz, Hu berisha mitchilasa v'ad sofo. As so the Gemara says, Avram, Hu Avraham, Hu Avraham b'zrei yamim. Avram was Avraham, Hu b'tzidko mitchilasa v'ad sofo. Righteous from beginning to end. Hu Aaron, Aaron and Moshe, hein b'tzidkan mitchilasan v'ad sofan. David, hu akatan, hu bikatnuso mitchilaso v'ad sofo. So this is actually very beautiful. What you begin to see, says the Gemara, something incredible, which is that whenever you see the Tanakh describing someone as who tells you that what? A person maintains a consistent state throughout their life. And I will say, by the way, sometimes you begin to see that the hallmark of great people is not their perfection, but the hallmark of great people is consistency. Consistency. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi say, isn't it incredible? I just want to point out, remember, it says Moshe, who Aaron and Moshe, tzaddikim the whole time. Rabbi say, is that true? Moshe and Aaron were tzaddikim the whole time? Moshe Rabbeinu made mistakes. Okay, granted, he made like 2 mistakes, right? But he made mistakes. Aaron make any mistakes? Yeah, like a little one called the eagle, right? A little one called the gold. So I was like, see what's amazing is the hallmark of great people is not perfection. The hallmark of great people is consistency. Moshe Rabbeinu was consistently great. Now again, no one's consistently, right? No one's perfect. But what makes great people great is this ability to be consistent. David is consistent. Moshe, and again, all of these great people made mistakes, but despite their mistakes, maintained a heightened level of spiritual consistency. Consistency is what makes us, is what allows us to unlock our greatness. Such an incredible yesod. So the Gemara says, what was great about David? For David who had katan, David ultimately again humbled himself. He made himself a katan. So kashem shebekatnuso hiktin es atzmo etzel misha gadol mena b'torah, kach b'malchuso hiktin atzmo etzel misha gadol mena b'chachma. We'll say David HaMelech, when he was young, he humbled himself before his Rabbi. Even when he became king, he humbled himself before his Rabbi as well. So we'll say an incredible yesod. Hamolech. So let's remember again, the pasuk says in the Megillah, Hamolech mehodu v'at kush, right? Achashverosh ruled. So Amarav, Shemalach me'atzmo. And we'll say this is very interesting machlokes. How did Achashverosh gain the throne? So Rav said, he coronated himself. He took the throne himself. Some say this as a praise, and some say it as a put down. So the Gemara says, some say even though Achashverosh was not born royalty, there was no one who was as fit for the throne as Achashverosh, and therefore even though he wasn't royalty, he took the throne. The others say no, it's actually a put down. He was not fit for the monarchy. Some things don't change, right? Money could buy a lot, including the monarchy. So some say he was totally unfit to be king. But he had a lot of money. So Baruch Hashem, he bought his way into the monarchy. So the Gemara says, Mehodu v'at kush. What does that mean? Ravu Shmuel Chadamar Hodu b'sofa olam, the Kush b'sofa olam. One say Hodu was on one side of the world and Kush is on the other side of the world. And therefore, again, the pasuk is teaching me that literally Achashverosh was the strongest ruler of the time. He ruled, his empire spanned from one end of the world to the other end of the world. Ki b'chadamar Hodu v'Kush gabi hadadi havokaimi. And one say no, Hodu and Kush are actually right next to each other. Kishem shemalach al Hodu v'Kush kach malach misofa olam v'ad sofo. Now, but interestingly enough, they're saying the same thing. The shaila is in the imagery. Achashverosh ruled the civilized world. The shaila is Hodu ad Kush. Is Hodu on one side of the world, Kush on the other side of the world, or maybe Hodu and Kush are right next to each other? And the same way he ruled on two countries right next to each other, he ruled on the entire world as well. Same idea. Rabbi Shmuel Chadamar tifsach b'sofa olam v'aza b'sofa olam. So we'll say, so again here, the Gemara quoting the pasuk from Malachim Aleph about Shlomo HaMelech. That Shlomo also ruled over large parts of the civilized world from Tifsach until Azal. Same idea. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Chadamar Tifsach b'sofa olam v'aza b'sofa olam. Tifsach was one end of the world, Azal was on the other side of the world. The Chadamar Tifsach v'aza v'hadi adadi v'kaima. Others say they were right next to each other. Kishim Shmolach al Tifsach v'aza kach malchala olam kulo. Good. Sheva v'esrim umeya Medina. Achashverosh ruled over 127 provinces. Amar Rav Chisda, Betchila Malach al Sheva, ulebasof malach al esrim, ulebasof malach al mea. So one opinion says the way to read this pasuk, I will say, it's talking about the expansion of Achashverosh's empire. First, he ruled over 7 countries, then 20, and ultimately 100. Elameata, if that's the case, Ushnei Chaye Amram, Sheva Ushloshim Umea Shana, Maidarash Tebe. So we'll say, here's the problem. Very often lifespans are recorded in the same way, right? You have years, decades, century. So what does that mean? First he lived 7 years, then he lived this year, then, in other words, no, it's meant what? To add on to each other. So to Mea Be'esim Sheva Medinos doesn't really mean 7, then 20, and then 127. Rather, what does it mean? What does it mean? 127. So the Gemara says, Shani Yachad Dekra Yisiruhu, Michtik Sidnei Hodoviat Kush. So we'll say, here's the problem. See, telling us that he ruled 127 provinces, or Mea Ve'esrim Mishal Medina, is really extra. Why? Because the Megillah already told me, he ruled from Hodu until Kush. Sheva Ve'esrim Mea Medina Lamali. Why do you need it to say 120, right? 120 and 7. Shma Mina L'drasha. This comes for a drasha. So both say, we're going to see it's machlokes. Did he rule over 127 provinces? Or perhaps no, 120 or 7, 20 and 7 is that 7, 20 and 100 is actually coming to tell us about the expansion of the empire. But it could be that in total, he only ruled over 100 different provinces. Okay, so I'll say, here we go. Turn out, I will say, profound Gemara. Shlosha malchu bekipa. There are 3 people who ruled the entire world. 3 people who ruled the entire world. Ve'eluain, who were they? Achov, Achashverosh, and Nebuchadnezzar. Achov, I will say, remember again, Achov, King Achov, right? So Achov, Achashverosh, and Nebuchadnezzar. They all ruled over the entire world. Achav dichsiv, Chaya Hashem Elokecha, Im yesh goy umamlocha shalo shalach Adoni sham levakshecha. Im lo, so the Gemara says, Ilo dahava malach alayu, hechi matzi mashbilahu. Right? We'll say, ultimately, again, if he did not rule over them, how was Achav able to get them to pledge allegiance to him? Nebuchadnezzar dichsiv, v'haya hagoy v'hamamlocha shalo yitin savaro, bal melech babel. Achashverosh had the Amr. Achashverosh, how we said. So we'll say Achav, Nebuchadnezzar, and Achashverosh. 3 kings who ruled over the entire world. And I will say, by the way, entire also doesn't have to mean entire. What does entire mean? What does entire mean? Majority, rov. Right? The Maharsha brings this down. It doesn't have to mean every single country. It means they ruled over the entire world. So the Gemara says, Amid Beis. So Besuleka, is there no one else? Right? Are there no other people who ruled over the entire world? Vayika Shlomo. What about Shlomo Melech? Shlomo Melech also ruled over a large part of the world, to which the Gemara will say, this is very profound. Lo Salak Malchusei. Shlomo's reign didn't really endure. It didn't really play out. And I will say, this happens that if you look at Rashi says over here, Lo Hishlim Malchuso, Shai Nitshrak. I will say, remember again, this is the wild Gemara in Maseches Gittin that speaks about Shlomo's struggles with Ashmedai. Right? And remember again, there is a whole machlokas exactly what happened to the end of Shlomo HaMelech's reign. Here's what we know. He was deposed by Ashmedai, the king of the Shadim. The shaila was he able to regain his monarchical footing or not? This is a fundamental machlokes. So the Gemara says, Hani chalamandamar melech v'hedjot. So according to the opinion that says, Shlomo never really regained his footing. Right? He was a melech, and then he became a commoner. And as much as he was able to come back to Eretz Yisrael and kind of regain the throne, he never really regained the full measure of his monarchy. But ultimately, again, according to the opinion that says, no, Shlomo Melech came back and he regained his monarchical footing. So why isn't Shlomo reckoned amongst the monarchs who were able to rule over the entire world? To which the Gemara says, Milsa Achrisi Hababe. The truth is, Shlomo HaMelech was in a category of his own. How so? Shemalach al ha'alyonim the al ha'tachtonim. I'll say ultimately again, Shlomo HaMelech was able to rule over the earthly sphere and over the malachim and shadim as well. Rashi says ala shadim, not malachim. Shlomo did rule over yes, Shlomo could be counted amongst the monarchs who ruled over the world, but Shlomo also ruled over the shadim. That is a different level of rulership. So here we're talking about kings who ruled over the entire physical world. So here we have Achav, Nebuchadnezzar, and Achashverosh. Shlomo different kind of parsha. Shnei Amar, Vayashav Shlomo al Kisei Hashem. Or Vayesh Shlomo al Kisei Hashem. I have Sancheriv. What about Sancheriv? Right, Sancheriv, the king of Ashur. He also seemed to rule over the entire civilized world. D'chsiv, Mi b'chol Elokei ha'aretz ha'sa'ila asher tzilos atzam miyadi. So the Gemara says, Ha'ika Yushalayim delo kavsha. Oh, there was Yushalayim. Isn't this incredible? So Sancheriv ruled over the entire world. But remember again, Sancheriv marched on Yerushalayim. This is in the days of Chizkiyahu. But ultimately, again, he was unable to conquer Yerushalayim. Remember again, this was the massive plague that wiped out the armies of Sancheriv overnight, as he marched on Yerushalayim. So he might have conquered the world, but it didn't conquer Yerushalayim. What an incredible Gemara. If you don't own Yerushalayim, you don't own the world. Right? The key to global conquest, right? If you want to be called ruling over the world, you have to have dominion over Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, Daryavesh. What about Daryavesh? Darius, D'chsiv, Daryavesh Malka Kasav L'chol Amamaya, Umaya V'lishna, Didarin B'chol Ara Shalmechan Yaskan. So we'll say, Daryavesh seemed to rule over the entire world. Ha'ika Sheva Dala Malach Alayhu. There were 7 countries that Daryavesh did not go ahead and rule over. D'chsiv, Shavrak Adam Daryavesh, V'hekim Amalchusa La'achshtar Penaya Mea Ve'esrin. So interestingly enough, his rulership extended over 120. Right? Whereas his father had 127, he had 120. So his rulership was not absolute. Vaiga Koresh. What about Koresh? What about Cyrus? D'chsiv, Koamar Koresh Melech Paras. Komam Sa'aretz Nasan Li Hashem. Right? What about Koresh, who says that again, God has given me rulership over all the lands of the earth? This is great. Hassam Ishtabuchi Had Kadam Ishtabech Benafshe. Actually, he was just praising himself. He didn't actually rule the world, right? He said he ruled the world. Everybody knows a guy like that, right? Who says he rules the world, but doesn't really rule the world. Right? So Koresh said he ruled the world, but ultimately, again, he did not actually rule the world. Incredible. I will say, now we come to a fascinating Gemara. By Yomim Mahim, Keshevas Hamelach. So we'll say, here we go. Back to the Megillah. So remember again, just to give you the context, what pasuk are you referring to? By Yomim Mahim, Keshevas Hamelach Achashverosh Hakisi Malchuso Asher B'Shushan Abira. So we'll say, remember again, the Megillah here, this is the beginning of the Megillah. What does the Megillah describe? A massive party that Achashverosh made a massive party, right? So he made a massive party. So the Gemara is going to try to understand what was at the root of this party. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Right? So ultimately, again, it says, in those days, Kisheves Hamelech Achashverosh, right? When Achashverosh literally again was settled, when he was settled on his throne. What does it mean he was settled on his throne? He made a party because he was settled on his throne. So we'll say, watch this. Amarava, my Kisheves, li'achar shenis yashvo daito. After Achashverosh's mind became settled, that now his throne was solidified. What does this have to do with Rabbi? Say, watch this Gemara. Amar, Belshazzar Chashav Vita. Belshazzar, who was 2 rulers earlier than Achashverosh, he made a mistake. What was his mistake? He says, Ana chashivna v'lo ta'ina. But I have the right calculations, and ultimately, again, I am not mistaken. Mahi, what are we talking about over here? I'll say, this is incredible. D'chsiv, kilafi melos, quotes over here, the pasuk. Kilafi, it's here. It's kilif koko amar Hashem kilafi melos labavel shivim shana efkod eschem bakimos yalechem esrei. Also, the pasuk in Yirmiyah says that 70 years kilafi melos labavel, 70 years from Bavel, Hakadosh Baruch Hu said He will redeem us. Remember again, the first Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and what's amazing is that diaspora after the first Beis Hamikdash, Hakadosh Baruch Hu tells us the duration. What's the duration of the Gullus after the first Beis Hamikdash? 70 years. 70 years. So Achashverosh says like this, Uksiv lemalos lecharos Yerushalayim shivim shana, and it says from 70 years from the destruction of the ruins of Yerushalayim, 70 years. So I will say, now watch this. We're going to see the Babylonian kings. Well, it's not just Babel. Remember again, I will say you start with really Bavel. Then Bavel becomes Paras, Persia. Persia becomes Madai. Then there's a consolidation, Paras Umadai, into one monarchy. So watch this. Belshazzar is calculating in 70 years. And he thought like this. Chashuv Arban v'chamish Nebuchadnezzar. There's 45 years that Nebuchadnezzar ruled. Ve'esrim utlas de'eva Merodach. 23 years of Eva Merodach. That was the ruler after Nebuchadnezzar. V'tarti didei. And 2 years of Belshazzar. Ha-shivim. So Belshazzar thought that the 70 years came to an end 2 years into Belshazzar's rule. Now, Belshazzar is very excited about this. Why is he very excited? Because 70 years have elapsed, and what? And what? The Jews have not been redeemed. 70 years, so now it's a Yom Tov, says Belshazzar. Now it's a party. The Jews are officially a conquered nation. They are officially again a So what did Belshazzar do to celebrate? Apikmani debe mikdasha vishtamish behu. Ultimately, again, he took out the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, the kelim of the conquered temple, and he made a party using those utensils. By the way, isn't this incredible? Even Belshazzar, right? Belshazzar, strong ruler, no one was messing with the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash until they were sure that the Jews were down and out. So they calculate 70 years, the Jews are done, now we could celebrate. And how do they celebrate? Take out the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash. So we'll say this. By the way, Nebuchadnezzar, how do you know that Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years? So the Gemara says, Damar Mar, Galu b'Sheva, Galu b'Shmona, Galu b'Shmona Asrei. So we'll say Galu b'Tisha Asrei. What does this mean? Galu b'Sheva, L'kibush Yoyachim, Galu Yoyachim. Ultimately, the exile of Yehoiachin occurred 7 years after King Yehoiachin was subdued. So again, remember, there's different stages of Nebuchadnezzar's conquering. So Yehoiakim is exiled 7 years after Yehoiachin, who was his father, was exiled. Shishmona Nebuchadnezzar, which was the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Galu b'Shmona Asrei. What does it mean they were exiled in the 18th year? Galu b'Shmona Asrei, L'kibush Yehoiakim, Galus Tzidkiyo. So ultimately, again, Yehoiakim, was exiled in the 18th year after the exile of Tzidkiyo. Shitisha Esrei Shana leNebuchadnezzar. Damar Mar, Shana Rishona Kibesh Ninveh, Shnia Kibush Yehoiakim. In the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he conquered Ninveh, and in the second year he went ahead and he conquered Yehoiakim. Uksiv, Vahi B'Shloshim V'Shev Shana Legolos Yehoiakim Melech Yehuda. It was in the 37th year to the Galus of Yehoiachin, the king of Yehuda. B'shnei masar chodesh, be'esrim v'chamisha l'chodesh, nasa Eva Merodach melech Bavel. Es Rosh Yehoiachin melech Yehuda. Eva Merodach actually freed Yehoiachin from his incarceration. Vayotze osa mibeis hakela. Timni utlas Timni. So ultimately, again, Nebuchadnezzar went ahead and ruled for 8 years. For 8 years before he exiled Yehoiachin. Utlasin v'sheva hari arbin v'chamesh Nebuchadnezzar. So that gives us 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar's rule. Ve'esrin utlas to Eva Merodach. How do we know that Eva Merodach ruled for 23 years? That's a Gemara. Right, that's a tradition that we have. V'tarti delay, and then Belshazzar says 2 years into my reign, do the math, hashivin. Ultimately, that gives us 70 years. Amar hashta vadai sulo mifriki. Belshazzar was convinced the 70 years had ended. Jews were not redeemed. No redemption in sight. Apik mane debei mikdasha vishtamish bei. He made a Yom Tov. He made a celebration. And what did he celebrate with? The very utensils of the Beis Hamikdash. Daniel va'amari shmai hisromamta. So this is Daniel speaking to Eva Merodach. You went ahead and you exalted yourself over HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mari Shmaya, ulamane di beise haisa kadamach. And you took the very utensils of his home. Uksiv. And I will say, so Belshazzar makes a big party, celebrating what? The demise of the Jewish people, and ultimately, the demise of the Jewish God. They're really celebrating over HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And how do you celebrate over HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Take the utensils of the Ribbon Shalom's home and celebrate with them in your home, in your castle. And what happened? Ksiv bei balayla katil Belshazzar makol kasdoi. Shabbos said, listen to this. That night, Belshazzar was killed. Right? The night after that party, Belshazzar and everyone else who attended that party ultimately lost their lives. So the Gemara says, Uksiv, v'daryavesh mada kiba malchuse, kibar shenin shtin v'tartin. And now we'll say after Belshazzar dies, so we'll say Belshazzar dies as a result of celebrating with the utensils of the Beis HaMikdash. After that, who becomes king? Daryavesh. Now, I want to point out, not Daryavesh, Achashverosh's son, right? This is an earlier Daryavesh. This is an earlier Daryavesh. So Daryavesh becomes king, right? And what happens? Daryavesh becomes king at the age of 62. Amar, so ultimately, so we'll say now fast forward. So remember again, that Daryavesh actually allowed for the reconstruction of the Beis HaMikdash, right? He allowed for the beginning of the reconstruction. He has no interest in persecuting Jews. Achashverosh comes along now with this off the stop. Amar, iu mitatoi, anna chashvina balo ta'ina. Achashverosh says, Belshazzar, he made a mistake with the calculations. I will not make a mistake with the calculations. Rabbi, we'll stop over here for today. We will pick up tomorrow. Good job, no? Whatever. I think, whatever. It's not I just want to point out. Anyway, we'll say Yahrzeit Hashem tomorrow. We will continue with Achashverosh's calculations and Yahrzeit Hashem and Baruch Hashem to see how he too was wrong as well. Shkayach, everyone.